So allow me to introduce our next speaker, which is Rood. So he teaches AI governance and safety at the Michigan State University and the University of Chicago, and he's also the founder of Perceptual, an AI governance and training consultancy. So I think as we spend the last 4 days and now the fifth one discussing AI, I think it's high time we actually discuss the ethics and the safety behind it. So John, thank you and welcome to the stage.
Danica, thanks for the great introduction. I'm happy to be here.
So I'm going to move out now because I know nothing about this topic and just pay close attention and grab all the notes I can as we listen to you. The stage is yours. Welcome again.
Awesome. All right. There we go. Well, hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Here's a quick introduction on me. So I'm the founder of a AI consultancy called Perceptual. We do AI safety, AI audit, an AI governance program installation, and also a lot of training related to that. I'm a certified lead auditor for ISO 42001, which is the leading certifiable standard for AI governance. If you don't know what that is, we're going to talk about it today. And this is the work that I do all day long. So we work with organizations from startup to Global 50, implementing their AI governance and ethics policies. So today we've got a jam-packed 30 minutes, and we're going to talk about three different topics briefly. So this is going to be kind of the very high-level overview of the topic of AI ethics and governance. So first of all, we're going to talk about why this is an issue at all. So why are we concerned about AI? Why aren't we just all totally pleased with it? I know probably each of us have our concerns and reasons, so we're going to go over those. Secondly, we're going to talk about the world of AI regulations and compliance. We're going to talk about this at an extremely high level. I'm not a lawyer. I'm definitely not your lawyer, so we're not going to talk about it from that standpoint, but instead just kind of see what are the big regulations happening around the world. And this is a good week to talk about it because there's been big news. And then finally, we're going to talk about what do we as HR professionals do about it? So how does this big world of AI and governance and ethics and regulation, what do we as actual, on the ground leaders and executives and managers do about these questions? So let's jump right in. Working with clients all over the world, what we've seen is that AI adaptation follows this curve, and I like to call it the trough of sorrow curve. So in the beginning, on the left side, we see this amazing new technology. It's doing all this cool stuff. This is kind of like 2022, 2023. And then most organizations kind of bottom out, right? So we see, well, there's all of these challenges with the world of AI, that many of the dangers that we're going to talk about today. And additionally, a lot of kind of the promised innovation and the promised additions, to our organization and to our, our profitability, streamlining our processes. Some of them just haven't happened yet, right? The output's not that good. Then organizations start to kind of figure it out and then get to the right side of the curve. But what I've observed is that 75% of organizations kind of at the bottom of this curve. And I mention this because every time I talk to audiences, and especially HR leadership audiences, there's this sense, I think, that, our competitors or folks in other industries are ahead of us on AI, and that's absolutely not the case, right? So obviously there's some outliers, there's Google and Microsoft or whatever, but the vast majority of organizations are kind of here. And the number one thing that we hear in this space is people saying, well, we bought everyone Microsoft Copilot, or we bought everyone ChatGPT Enterprise Edition, but now what do we do with it, right? And that's especially germane to us as an HR audience because we're responsible for training the organization on what to actually do with these tools. So here's a question, and you can put this in the chat, or you can just think about it for a second. What do you think the most junior person in your organization is doing with AI in their role? I love to ask this question because it starts to bring to the surface some of the challenges that organizations have with governing AI and using AI safely and properly. I think that we like to think that, us as executives have at least some familiarity with things like information security, privacy, et cetera. But these are questions and issues that filter down throughout the entire organization. So there's four big issues that I talk about when we talk about some of the dangers or challenges with AI. And we're going to talk about these in turn today. And this will be a very high level overview, just given that we've got, a brief time together today. So the first is hallucination. So you probably know what a hallucination is in the world of AI. Hallucination in AI speak is simply the AI algorithm giving a wrong output, right? Something that's just literally wrong, right? There's no room for interpretation. And this can cause significant problems within the organization. So here's an example where, a lawyer used ChatGPT in court to find some, cases to get their precedent from, and ChatGPT just made up the cases, right? Just from whole cloth, made them up, and the lawyer is in big trouble, right? This is a really serious issue. When I talk about hallucinations, and this kind of goes for all the challenges that we talk about today, hallucination to me is not what I think about as AI risk. I think a lot of times people talk about this as hallucinations is like an AI problem, so to speak. But to me, hallucination is a people problem, right? Because our organizations are made of people, right? And so people are using AI. AI is giving the people bad outputs, and then it's up to the organization, to the actual human beings in our organization, to figure out what to do with these outputs, how to check these outputs. So we're going to talk a lot about training today at the end of our talk. But this is kind of where I set the stage for this idea that all the challenges that we talk about are really people challenges, not technology challenges. The ability for AI to create audio and video files is also advancing extremely quickly. So you've probably heard the term a deep fake. So a deep fake is someone producing usually a video file with audio of someone doing something, and it's not actually them. Right. So here's a picture of me. Unfortunately, you can't play the video here, but you can see this is my face, this is my office, more or less. But what we see on the screen is my AI avatar. And we actually use this for training quite a bit. For those of you who have experimented with programs like Synthesia or like HeyGen, these are quite easy to create, so that you don't need to be some kind of AI hacker to create these kinds of outputs. Anyone can do it, but they can cause really significant problems throughout the organization. So in this situation, there's an organization in Hong Kong, and there was a finance manager level type person, and they get an email invitation to meet with their CFO, right? That's pretty standard. So they get on the Zoom call with the CFO, and the CFO, there's the CFO's face, here's the CFO's voice, and the CFO tells them to wire $25 million to a certain account. And so the person does it, right? Because the CFO told them to. And it turns out that it was a deep fake, right? So this is a situation, this is kind of the worst situation I found, where there's a $25 million fraud at stake. But we have to start thinking in our organizations about, how are we going to respond and train the folks in our teams to avoid all the different levels of fraud that are going to be endemic with the world of AI. Phishing is another one of these. Probably every organization is doing things to combat phishing, but in the world of AI, it's going to get even worse. So all of the phishing scams that you've seen can now be massively personalized at scale. So I've seen phishing scams where, previously it would send out an email. It's like, hey, John, go get a gift card and send me the code. Okay, now we're all used to kind of seeing that scam. We've had it played out. We train against it. The next version of that is going to be, hey, John, I hope you and your family had a great time at, on vacation, in the south of France. Now it's time to get back to work. I need you to go buy me these gift cards, right? Because it's scraped, my Facebook, my LinkedIn, my Instagram. So it knows that I went on vacation with my family in the south of France. It's able to kind of use that to create more, I guess I would say, accurate fraud. So that's a big challenge. Trademark and IP is a huge concern as well. This is a concern for every organization. This is just one example where, OpenAI has used all of the back files of the New York Times, as well as, thousands of other websites, to train their algorithms, and the New York Times sued them. And so we're going to see a lot of this play out in the court system all around the world and in every different jurisdiction. But it's an issue at the individual company level as well, because what we upload to, especially the free versions of ChatGPT, oftentimes is used to train the algorithms. And so this is less of a concern, or it's a manageable concern when we get the pro versions or the business versions of these systems. But if we're not doing that, or we're not training our people why, for example, uploading our entire customer database to free ChatGPT is a bad idea, people don't know that, right? So that's where, again, we're going to talk about training, but this is a significant risk. The last risk that we're going to talk about, again, really briefly today, is AI bias. For us as HR executives and leaders, this is probably the issue that's, I think, front of mind, because it's the one that's on our desk. AI bias is a real issue in the world of hiring and people management, termination decisions, layoff decisions, all of it. We do at our organization lots of work on the audit side of this. We can't get into too much detail about this idea or about how bias happens, but when we think about what do executives do about bias, we have to think about doing regular audits of our systems. We have to think about creating human in the loop processes where, when an AI recommends, an action for or against a person, like there's a human being that's able to consider that. And we have to consider transparency requirements that let people know that they're being judged by an AI system. So bias is really a key concern. So that's a whirlwind on some of the issues that we should be thinking about and a little bit concerned about. Let's talk about regulation a little bit. So this is the news from this week. The EU has already passed the EU AI Act. It was set to go mostly into effect in 2026. For those of you that are experts on this, it's a phased approach, yes, but the most impactful parts of the regulation were going to go into effect in next year. That's likely moved back, and it's likely moved back for a couple reasons. One of them is that the EU just didn't get their act together on this. Like there were a lot of mechanisms and offices and processes that needed to be created given the text of the regulation for organizations to comply. Like right now, no organization in the world can possibly be compliant with the EU AI Act because there's filings that need to be filed at an office that doesn't exist, right? So that's been pushed back. There's also been a ton of pushback from I think the entire tech community saying that this is a really significant piece of regulation and that there's going to be a very substantial compliance cost, which is absolutely accurate, right? Is the person doing the compliance, like the costs are significant. I've been doing this work for about 3.5 years now. And when we first started in 2022, which was kind of the beginning of the ChatGPT era, it was polite to call AI regulation a patchwork. And what it really meant was that it was a total disaster. And it was a total disaster because every government at every level was trying to pass regulations. So from the EU level to the member state or country level to the sub-state level, all the way down to the municipal level. So New York City here in the U.S. Has its own AI regulation that we do a ton of work on. So that happening at every level, it was very confusing. It's going to continue to be a little confusing, but what we're seeing is that some clarity is emerging in this world of AI regulation. One of the places where we're seeing clarity is kind of around the EU AI Act itself as a model for global regulation. For those of you who remember GDPR getting rolled out, a lot of organizations worldwide ended up complying with GDPR, kind of whether or not they were likely to be caught, right? They were not like small organizations in other parts of the world are very unlikely to be the victim, so to speak, of a GDPR enforcement action. But most organizations complied because other organizations in their value chain made them do it, right? And that's the call that we get all the time, which is, I work at a 500 person organization, but we're trying to sell into enterprise, and we need to get these AI compliance requirements met. So the EU AI Act has this, what they call a risk-based approach. And the risk-based approach, you kind of see the pyramid there on the left. There's some parts of AI that are simply called unacceptable risk. And then there's this large category that are called high risk. The high-risk systems are there on the right. The one that you'll notice halfway down is employment and management of workers. So the tools that we use as HR leaders on a very routine, regular basis, such as our HR information system, our applicant tracking system, our performance management system, to the extent that those include AI, and if you go to their website, you're going to see, right, it's emblazoned on the top of whatever you use for your ATS is now powered by AI. It's going to require really substantial compliance obligations. So this is not to read. I'm not going to read it to you. Don't worry. I like to show this slide because this is Article 9 of the EU AI Act. It's Article 9 of many dozens of articles. And as you can see, it is quite dense. This is a really substantial compliance requirement. So EU AI Act is not something that an organization can say, oh, I guess we need to get this figured out. Like, let's do it this month. This is the kind of regulation that needs to be thought about 6 to 18 months in advance, and 6 months would be really cutting it close. So organizations that are planning to comply with EU AI Act, which legally is like most of them, really need to be thinking about this in advance. And the fact that the implementation is likely moved back by about a year gives us some extra time, but not a lot of extra time, right? So this is the kind of thing that organizations should be thinking about now. So let's talk briefly, about what we do about this as leaders, right? So the solution to these challenges, to me, is AI governance. We're going to talk about what that means. The first level of AI governance, and this is especially the case for us as HR executives and leaders, is creating internal AI use policies. If most organizations now, I think from my discussions, have these. When I would give this talk a year ago or 18 months ago, very few organizations did. Now it seems like maybe 60, 70% seem to. If you don't have an AI use policy, like now is the time to get started on this. It's really critical. And so we work through this 5-step process when we work with this with our clients on this, and it's easily replicatable in organizations. So we're identifying the process owners. Step 2 is creating a registry of all the AI systems in the organization. This is an important step, which I find sometimes HR leaders miss this step. You really can't move forward with an AI policy unless you have a database of how AI is being used in the organization now. Because when your policy comes out, it shouldn't just be like, here's some boilerplate. It should specifically be ready to address the issues that AI is creating in the organization today. And it should be also forward-looking, but should do both of those things. So we draft the policy. Importantly, we have to conduct a lot of training. And again, that's where we as HR executives come in. A policy that doesn't get trained on is just sitting in a desk somewhere. It's not really doing any good. And that's, I think, one of the challenges is that this is an ongoing policy that needs to be reviewed at least on a quarterly basis. And that means that the organization has to change, right? There's processes to put in place. I always, when we talk about AI use policies, I always say this too, which is that the AI policy can no longer just be banning something, right? So I relate to things like our sexual harassment policy, where we say, here's what the bad thing is. You can't do the bad thing, right? That's not what we're looking for with the AI use policy. Yeah, some things will be banned, right? But the AI policy is a balancing document, and it has to balance all the benefits that we get out of AI. So streamlining our operations, improving our profitability, making each of us as individual people more productive. Those are balanced against some of the challenges that we had just seen. So to me, it's a safety document, like your information security policy. It's also a culture document, right? And so that the culture of the organization it powerfully interacts with this, because AI governance is all about risk management. So the way that we think about AI risk may be very different at a large organization or highly regulated organization versus at a startup. The AI use policy helps guide that. You may have heard of this term, shadow AI. Shadow AI is the use of AI by folks on your team that is either against the policy or in the absence of a policy. Shadow AI enables many of the risks that we had discussed previously. It's very likely to occur in organizations that simply ban AI or simply say, like, we can only use this one AI system. And shadow AI, in my experience, is very likely to occur when the AI systems that an organization uses internally are worse than off-the-shelf ChatGPT. And I see this all the time. So I hear from organizations just on a weekly basis, at least, that say, hey, we got Microsoft Copilot because it was packaged with our Microsoft Teams subscription. And so that's what we use, and everything else is banned. And then they notice that it's so locked down. There's nothing wrong with Microsoft Copilot. It's fine technology, but the information security team locks it down so far that it becomes less useful than just the normal off-the-shelf ChatGPT. And then folks in the organization route around that policy. So shadow AI is the result of either a failed AI policy creation or a failed implementation. So if you see that term shadow AI, if folks in your organization are using AI that's not approved, it suggests that there's more work to do on the policy. We've talked about AI governance quite a bit. AI policy internally is the first step of that. The next step of that is this kind of broader idea of AI governance. And AI governance at the high level is all of these frameworks, practices, policies that ensure that we're using AI ethically, accountably, transparently. The best practice makes use of frameworks that already exist. So if you're thinking like, oh my gosh, how do we do this? Do we have to start from scratch? The good news is no. So there are frameworks like, for example, ISO 42001. Maybe you've heard of, ISO 27001, which is information security. This is the kind of the next generation that's for AI governance. There's in the United States, there's the NIST AI risk management framework. There's going to be lots of governance frameworks. Some of them will kind of like rise to the top in terms of popularity. Those are the two that I find most popular, that we work the most with. But it's really helpful to say, instead of starting from scratch, we're going to implement an existing and well-known framework. So usually governance will include our organization's principles, values, and our goals, our risk management programs. How do we identify and quantify risk? Then our policies and procedures for what do we do with those risks in the organization, and always ongoing training, ongoing policy review and development. AI governance is not stagnant. Even if the technology was stagnant, which, as you know, it's not, the policy isn't stagnant. Like, these things have to change and evolve. Part of this is establishing a governance team. Now, us as HR leaders, like, this is not only us. This has to be a cross-functional team. Oftentimes, the governance team will include the CEO. Sometimes they'll include a board member or an investor as well. And it always should include some non-technical contributors. So the best practice for AI governance, which again is I'm not making this up, this is in the frameworks that we were just discussing, has to include folks that are not like the tech team, right? And so HR executives are a great person to have on this governance team. And then the last thing I'll say before we get to our takeaways is training here is so important. Again, you can have all the policies, you can have all the procedures, but if we're not training our people on basic AI literacy, we're not doing the right things here. So everyone in the organization that uses, it's silly to say it, but that uses the computer, which is like everybody, has to get this basic training on AI. The basic training on AI should go through some of the challenges that we've discussed today, and of course, more detail than we will do in 25 minutes. We'll talk about, why are these challenges today? What are some of the challenges with AI use in the organization, again, a company specifically? How do we follow our company's practices? And then what do we do if there is an incident, right? So incident reporting, incident management is a huge part of this. If we're just training our folks on prompt engineering and that's it for AI training, we're not doing the hard work of showing them the trade-offs and making clear how our organization has chosen to manage AI risk. So if I were in your shoes, my 2026 priorities as an HR executive as relates to AI would be: number one, if we don't have an internal use policy, absolutely have to get it. Number two, thinking about that right level of AI governance. And again, the AI governance system that might regulate like a large healthcare system will be very different in complexity and in risk tolerance than, a small startup that makes, video games or something. And then train on both performance and safety in the world of AI. Again, I think an organization's making a big mistake if we're not training our folks on using AI for productivity. But I also think we're making a big mistake if we're not at the same time training on safety. All right. That is the end of my prepared remarks. I have saved 4 minutes of the 5 I have committed to for additional questions. If there's anyone in the audience. Let's see. So love to connect with people on LinkedIn. Let's get questions.
Hi, John. First of all, thank you for this. I knew it was going to be insightful. I did not know it was going to be funny as well. So I have to mention that was one of the comments. So thank you for bringing this such a serious topic to us in such an interesting way. There were a couple of comments. One of them you answered with your last slide. So I want to answer this one. So what makes AI in HR uniquely high risk compared to some other business applications?
That's a great question. And the answer is, when we think about AI and risk management, whenever there's the possibility that AI could be used to hurt actual people, like human beings, that's a very high risk function. So to me, the work that we do in HR is just inherently exactly that. So when we make a decision to hire one person and not another, that has a big impact on both of those people. When we make a decision to, lay off one person, not the other, that has a huge impact on their actual life. So that's why that goes kind of to the top of the list, where, AI video games or something that don't really impact real people is not nearly as high risk.
That's a great example. I also want to highlight that your LinkedIn profile is in the comments. So for everyone listening to this that wants to follow you and connect with you, please do that, because this is such an interesting topic and very relevant to what's happening today. So one question from my side as well is, can you share like an example where like things could have gone wrong, but they were mitigated at the right time, perhaps without obviously revealing any sensitive data or something like from your practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So we one day we got a call from a relatively large healthcare organization, and they did home healthcare. So they send nurses into people's homes, and
Okay.
then the nurses would would write up like their medical note. And they had a nurse who would write, a sentence or two, and like their language skills in this language weren't particularly great, which is totally fine. And then one
Yeah.
day the nurse's notes became these like 5 paragraph essays with like this like flowing text, and it was like super clear that they were just uploading their notes to Chat GPT. um,
Oh.
that's a disaster, right? I mean, it's like a regulatory and risk disaster. And the thing is, like, we say that's like, okay, that like you and I may know not to do that, but in an organization that employs thousands of people, often
Yeah.
many of them are frontline workers. Unless we tell people not to do that, they don't know, right? So that's an opportunity where kind of this basic kind of like a line of AI literacy training is so critical.
Yeah. I love that. And I think I want to highlight, I know it perhaps sounds like simple, but just because you and I know not to do that doesn't mean that everyone else, like assuming that people are able to decide for themselves for something that is so new and like so risky is a mistake in itself.
Absolutely.
Thank you, John, so much. I will definitely connect with you and continue this discussion. I think it's super relevant for all HR professionals. And for everyone else, this is the end of track B, and see you in 5 minutes on the main stage.